On the day Palpatine died at the Battle of Endor, the Galactic Empire had over 1 million starships in active service. Its military numbered in the trillions. It controlled, depending on which sourcebook you trust, between 50 and 75% of the inhabited galaxy. End Games Imperial Sourcebook, published 1989, documented 25,000 Imperial-class Star Destroyers alone, each crewed by over 37,000 officers and enlisted, each deployed, classified, and named. The Empire had an industrial base across 40,000 habitable worlds, research programs on superweapons in development, a sector governor system that had been running for 23 years, an officer corps raised from birth inside an institution that, for many of them, was the only government they had ever known. That is what the Empire actually was on day zero of its collapse. In the Disney sequel trilogy, what came next is 30 years of nothing, and then a fleet rising vertically from an underground facility on a planet called Exegol, 1,080 Xyston-class Star Destroyers, crewed by what community calculations from the Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary's fleet data put at roughly 31 million people, who had somehow been subsisting beneath the planet's surface since the end of the Galactic Civil War. In the expanded universe, everything that follows is Legends canon, not Disney canon, stated once and not repeated. What came next is 15 years of fragmentation, warlordism, one brilliant counteroffensive, and a signed treaty. 15 years. 3 named wars. 1 document with 2 signatories and a specific ship where the signing took place. This video is the direct sequel to what the First Order should have been. That one showed the structural problem. This one shows what the solution already looked like in books Disney owned on the day they bought Lucasfilm. A commenter on this channel's most watched video put the thesis better than I could in 110 words. The commenter's handle is @redundant_narrator. To understand the absurdity of this scenario, imagine if, in our timeline, after the end of World War II, roughly 1,000 loyalists of the Reich retreated on an uncharted island in the Arctic, managed to survive and maintain their population for decades. Then, in the 1970s, after going undetected for 3 decades, they reveal that they've built a stockpile of 30 nuclear missiles, and they now threaten to destroy the biggest cities on Earth. That comment has 676 likes. Another on the same video, with over 1,100 likes, reads, "The frustrating thing is that an Imperial remnant, functioning more like a terrorist organization, could have been really cool." Those 2 comments are the outline of this video. What follows is the evidence. Galad Pelleon was a captain when the Empire ended. He was aboard his Star Destroyer Chimera above Endor when the Death Star's explosion lit the sky and the Imperial fleet, leaderless, dissolved. He did what his commanders couldn't. He ordered the retreat. 50 years in the Imperial fleet, and this is how it ended for him. Not in defeat, but in the collapse of a chain of command that had centralized too much authority in a single body. 5 years later, that image is what Thrawn uses to explain the error. The Empire wasn't beaten, it was decapitated. Grand Vizier Sate Pestage, the highest surviving member of the Imperial Court, assumed the throne as regent within hours of Endor. He lost it within months. Rival counselors formed what the records call the Emperor's ruling circle, then turned on him. Director Isan Isard, who had inherited control of Imperial intelligence from her father, deposed the council, then moved on Pestage himself. He fled to personal holdings in the Sutric hegemony. His Wikipedia entry lists 2 separate death dates, 5 ABY on Sutric 4, or 11 ABY on Bis, because the Legends timeline was complex enough that one character could have contested deaths. Isard consolidated control and deployed the Krytos virus, an engineered bioweapon targeting non-human species specifically, released during the New Republic's liberation of Coruscant. Infect the population before seeding the planet. Force the incoming government to exhaust its Bacta reserves, treating the outbreak. Watch it destabilize under its own humanitarian response. This is documented in Michael Stackpole's X-Wing novel, The Krytos Trap, published October 1996, set in 7 ABY. Meanwhile, Prince Admiral Delac Crenel held the Sutric hegemony aboard his Imperial-class Star Destroyer, Reckoning. Warlord Zinj commanded a super Star Destroyer called Iron Fist, and carved out his own sector government. The Eclipse-class Dreadnought, 17,500 meters, Kuat drive yards, equipped with an axial superlaser, was under construction as a flagship for a reborn emperor at Biss. In the Dark Empire comic series, Palpatine returned through a technique called essence transfer, transmitting his consciousness into a prepared clone body. Not somehow Palpatine returned, a named mechanism, explained and executed across 6 issues. Someone in the comments once noted the Final Order concept is essentially Warhammer 40k. The God Emperor of mankind has been entombed on the Golden Throne for 10,000 years, and the comparison lands harder than it should. This is the Warlord period. Named factions, named leaders, named ships, named atrocities. The EU did the work. 5 years after Endor, with the Imperial Remnant pushed back to barely a quarter of its original territory. That phrase is from Heir to the Empire's first chapter. Grand Admiral Thrawn returned from the unknown regions and took command of what remained. His doctrine was specific. Study an enemy's art and you understand their psychology. Understand their psychology and you predict their tactics. His first move on returning? A data raid on the Obroa Sky library system, extracting intelligence rather than firing a shot. His first strategic acquisition was the Katana fleet, 200 Dreadnought-class heavy cruisers that had vanished decades earlier after the crew was struck by a madness that sent them into hyperspace and never brought them back. Thrawn's intelligence service tracked down a smuggler named Niles Ferrier, who led them to a Captain Hoffner, who knew where the fleet was. Thrawn recovered all but 15 of the 200 ships before the New Republic knew he was looking. Each dreadnought had been retrofitted with full automation, requiring minimal crew, a critical advantage for a remnant running short on manpower. He added 179 of them to his battle order. By any measure, that acquisition doubled his effective capital ship count overnight. Then Ukiyo. The last command describes it as one of the great bread bowls of the New Republic. Thrawn took it undamaged, using cloaked cruisers positioned beneath Ukiyo's planetary shields, coordinating their fire through the Dark Jedi Sabaoth's battle meditation to strike in exact synchronization with the Chimera's orbital bombardment. The Ukiyans believed he had a weapon that could fire through planetary shields. He didn't. He had better intelligence and better timing than anyone else in the war. Ukiyo's food production was immediately diverted to the Imperial war effort. Separately, the Sparty cloning cylinders at Mount Tantus on Wayland were producing soldiers in 15 to 20 days, with Ysalamiri, creatures that suppress the Force in a localized field, deployed around the cylinders to prevent the clone madness that otherwise made rapid growth unstable. Thrawn's campaign ended at the Battle of Bilbringi. Rook, his Nogri bodyguard, who had learned the Empire had been deliberately poisoning his homeworld Honoghr rather than healing it as promised, stabbed Thrawn in the chest on the Chimera's bridge. The stains spread across the white uniform. Thrawn looked at it and said, "But it was so artistically done." Then he died. Pelleon ordered the full retreat. The structural parallel to Endor is exact. Both times, the Empire loses the moment a single commanding intelligence is removed, and no one below them is ready to replace them. Palpatine's over-centralization didn't end at Endor. It replicated itself in Thrawn's absence. Pelleon inherited what was left. He spent the next decade holding it together. By 19 ABY, confirmed by Vision of the Future's internal timeline and the Essential Reader's Companion, he told his captain, "It's time to send an emissary to the New Republic to discuss the terms of our surrender." The Pelleon-Gavrisom Treaty, also called the Bastion Accords, was signed aboard the Chimera. Pelleon represented the Imperial Remnant as Fleet Admiral and Supreme Commander. New Republic Acting Chief of State Pelleon-Gavrisom, a Calibop, co-signed. The terms? Confirmed borders, banned cloaking devices, open trade, no outright territorial surrender. The Imperial Remnant remained a sovereign regional power in the Outer Rim. The Galactic Civil War lasted 15 years after Endor, in the books, in the timeline Disney set aside. That 1,100-like comment about a terrorist organization model is exactly what the post-treaty period was already building toward. A signed treaty doesn't eliminate ideological commitment. The IRA restructured into active service units, decentralized cells, in 1977 after British counterinsurgency operations broke the old battalion hierarchy. NATO's Operation Gladio, a clandestine stay-behind network across Western Europe, was revealed publicly by Italian Prime Minister Giulio Andreotti on October 24, 1990. Decades of ideologically committed operatives embedded in civilian infrastructure, ready to activate. Hiroo Onoda fought on Lubang Island in the Philippines from 1945 until March 1974. 29 years. His commanding officer had to fly to the island and formally relieve him before he would stop. He was 23 when Japan surrendered. He had known no other government. Imperial officers raised under Palpatine, an ideology backed by indoctrination, family obligation, and 23 years of institutional schooling. A treaty that left sovereign territory intact, armed, and ideologically unresolved. These aren't the conditions for a clean ending. They are the setup for exactly what that comment described. Network cells that don't need a planet-killing weapon because they're already inside the systems they're targeting. That is dramatically coherent. That is historically grounded. That is what was already written. Disney replaced it with the First Order, a galaxy-spanning military that appeared 30 years after Endor with no in-film account of how it was built, funded, crewed, or hidden. Claudia Gray's novel Bloodline, published 2016, establishes a reasonable political origin, a centrist faction that seceded from the New Republic. The on-screen scale has nothing to do with that framework. The Final Order compounds this. The Rise of Skywalker Visual Dictionary confirms 1,080 Xyston-class Star Destroyers, manufactured on Exegol by a cult called the Sith Eternal, with parts reportedly smuggled from major shipyards by board members secretly loyal to Palpatine. The crew, drawn from children raised on Exegol specifically for this mission. All of this delivered in tie-in material after the film, left the logistics unexplained. The fleet rises from underground, and the audience is asked to accept it. On April 25, 2014, StarWars.com announced the expanded universe was being reclassified as Legends in order to give new storytellers creative freedom. The treaty scene in Vision of the Future. The Warlord period across Stackpole's X-Wing series. The Thrawn trilogy's 15 million copies sold. All of it set aside. All of it still sitting in the catalog, still owned, still available, and none of it consulted when it came time to explain what happened after Endor. Pelleon stood at the forward viewport of the Chimera, looked out at what remained of an empire he had served for 50 years, and decided it was time to stop. The Bastion Accords were signed. The war ended. Both signatories were named. The ship was named. The date was recorded. None of this was on screen. None of it had to be missing. Subscribe if you want more of this, and tell me in the comments which part of the Legends timeline you'd put on screen first.